My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and continuing the Silmarillion Synopsis series, we're now covering Chapter 14 of the Noldor in Beleriand, a rather nondescript title, but which has a lot of important, significant material that really kind of alters the dynamic of the elves in Beleriand, so let's get started. After the victory of the Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle, Turgon again began to think about building a city in that hidden vale that Ulmo had revealed to him in the mountains to the east of the River Sirion. And so he finally decided to really start building it because all these continued battles basically made him realize kind of need to get things moving along. So he begins to build the city, and it originally he names it Ondolinde, which is the music of water, but in Sindarin it ends up being known as Gondolin, which is the hidden rock. It took 250 years to build, and Ulmo, through his power in the river of Sirion, basically made sure it was kept secret during this time. And as it was being built, Turgon was still living in Nevrost, and so near the end, when he was getting ready to move all of his people to Gondolin after it was complete, Ulmo appeared to him again and basically told him, "Your kingdom will last the longest of all the kingdoms of the elves in Middle-earth, but because you're under the doom of Mondos, you're still in danger of having treason awake within your own people, and therefore in danger of this entire project coming to nothing in the end. And so if that peril ever comes near, then you will have a messenger come to you from Nevrost," and therefore Ulmo told him to leave armor and weapons for this messenger to find, so that when he came to Gondolin, they would know by the armor and the weapons that this is the person that Ulmo was referring to. Ulmo sort of ends this warning with a kind of advice to love not too well the work of thy hands, basically kind of pointing at that whole Noldorin thing, which of course affected Feanor, which is they like to make things and they tend to get a little bit greedy about those things, and that will become relevant again, so keep that in mind for way down the road. We won't come back to this for a while. So Turgon does in fact leave, and the Noldor he takes with them are about a third of the entire group that came with Fingolfin, and he also takes a bunch of Sindar who were living there, and that's an even bigger group. So he takes a lot of elves with him, and nobody knows where they went, which, kind of mystifies everybody, and they won't pop up again for a long while. Meanwhile, Galadriel is still living in Doriath with Thingol and Melian, and over time it becomes a little clear to Melian that something's not quite right, because Galadriel will never talk about, basically kind of the last events that happened before the Noldor returned to Beleriand. She won't talk about the kinslaying, obviously, for really obvious reasons. She won't talk about the Oath of Feanor. She won't talk about much of anything, so basically anything after the death of the two trees. And Melian kind of gets this, and at one point confronts her and basically says, something's not right, especially with the Sons of Feanor, and you're not telling me everything. What's going on? And Galadriel basically says, you're not going to get that from me. Melian points out that she kind of has already figured out that the Noldor didn't come, as was originally thought, as messengers from the Valar to aid the Sindarin elves in their war against Morgoth. And Galadriel admits that, but she won't tell much of anything else other than the existence of the Silmarils and the fact that Finwë was killed. Finwë, of course, you may remember, was Thingol's friend before Finwë and the Noldor crossed the Great Sea to Valinor, and Thingol remained with many of his elves. So they were good friends before, and so that's kind of pertinent. So Melian conveys this information to Thingol. Thingol, of course, recognizes that because of the whole Silmaril issue, the Sons of Feanor especially, and the rest of the Noldor as well, will never ever, make any kind of alliance or anything with Morgoth, or, even come to peace terms. And so he basically points out, well, at least we've got that going for us. Melian, on the other hand, is a little less sanguine about the value of this relationship, and basically says, well, they're still pretty dangerous if you ask me, and said, especially to beware of Feanor's sons, who seem pretty haughty and fell and not the nicest people. And she also mentions that she can kind of tell there's something evil in their background. Thingol basically counters that, well, their swords will still be the greatest weapons against our own enemy. Melian counters, well, their swords and their counsels will have two edges. Thingol's argument, of course, is slightly ironic, given that he doesn't know about the kinslaying. And so his comments here, you could tell, really are out of ignorance, and that comes up again later in the chapter. Rumor begins to spread among the Sindar of the kinslaying and some other nasty things that happened back in Valinor involving the Noldor. Now, basically it implies that these rumors were begun by Morgoth and his servants basically to create division amongst the Noldor. And Círdan, who is, leading the elves at the havens further south, he picks up on these rumors and being, wiser than the average elf, recognizes that there's malice behind the spreading of these rumors. And so he's not really sure what to do about it, but he's thinking that it's the Noldor, kind of doing it to each other because Fingolfin's people don't really get along that well with Feanor's people, and Feanor's people are just kind of not that great anyway. So he's thinking that that's behind all this, not recognizing that it's actually Morgoth. And so he sends messengers to Thingol, basically explaining these rumors and saying what he's heard. It just so happens that when his messengers arrive, Galadriel's brothers, Finrod, Angrod, and Agnor, and Orodreth, are visiting, basically just to visit Galadriel mainly. And when the messengers arrive and tell Thingol all this stuff, Thingol then confronts the sons of Finarfin and basically says, I can't believe you didn't tell me all this nasty stuff you did to me and, well, to my people in Valinor. And Finrod is, recognizing, not understanding, what he's talking about because nobody's told him about the kinslaying as far as he knows. Basically says, we haven't done anything against you or your kingdom, your people, anything like that. What are you talking about? Thingol counters, well, you didn't ask for pardon or anything for killing my kin in Alqualande. What's up with that? Finrod, of course, now realizes, oh, he knows about that. That's a problem. And he wants to defend himself, but he can't do that without implicating other elves, and so he just kind of sits there in silence because he doesn't want to implicate other elves who aren't there to defend themselves, I guess. But Angrod, who you may remember was the first person to go to Doriath and visit Thingol, and then was kind of insulted by Caranthir because of this, he's still angry about that whole encounter with Caranthir, and so he just kind of blurts out and tells Thingol the whole story, that, the sons of Finarfin had nothing to do with the kinslaying. They came up last and, they weren't involved. Fingolfin's people didn't really know what was going on when they got there. It was mainly the Feanorian camp's fault. So he lays out all the details, and after all that is said and done, Thingol basically says, okay, I'm still really angry about this, so y'all need to get out. But because of what Angrod told him, he's willing to have the sons of Finarfin back because they're still relatives. And he's also willing to maintain his friendship with Fingolfin because even to the extent that they did anything wrong, they definitely paid for it with the misery that they went through in crossing the Helcaraxe. So, he's willing to maintain that friendship, although they're still not welcome in Doriath. So in some sense, the status quo hasn't changed much in those terms, but it creates a lot of extra tension. But the thing that Thingol does that really ups the ante is he basically says that the language of the Noldor, which is Quenya, that will not be spoken in his realm, and he won't allow any of his elves to answer to it. So if a Sindarin elf, hears somebody speaking Quenya, just act like you don't hear them. And so that does create a lot more tension, and the Sindar do, in fact, shun basically anybody who uses Quenya. As a result, the Noldoran language ends up being used mainly as a language of lore or used by the Noldor just among themselves, but daily speech just becomes Sindarin. And so that's how, if you really pay attention to Tolkien's works later on and you can tell the difference between Sindarin and Quenya, you'll notice virtually everybody uses Sindarin. This is why. But so that's kind of where Thingol leaves that. Sometime later, Galadriel is actually visiting Finrod in his new realm of Nargothrond, and his other brothers are there as well. And after a while, Galadriel asks him, basically, why haven't you married? What's going on? And it tells us later on that Finrod actually did love a Vanyarin elf back in Valinor, but of course she didn't come on the exile, and so basically the only romantic interest he's had is back in Valinor. But Feanor, in kind of a prophetic mood, stands up and basically says, I too will swear an oath and must be free to fulfill it and go into darkness, and there will be nothing left of my realm for a son to inherit. So that's kind of a gloomy thought, and it's pointing at something that'll happen a few chapters down the road, and I'll try to remember to make sure that I reference that again, but in case I don't, he's referring to the Beren and Luthien stories, so just keep that in mind for the Beren and Luthien chapter. And that's kind of where this chapter leaves us. It's just a little short end section, which is a little bit gloomy, but it's, we're getting to the point in the story where things are about to start going downhill. That won't be much longer. So I think that's probably why this little piece got inserted here. So this chapter basically has set up a lot of things that are going to start happening. It's kind of a transitional chapter, but it's definitely something you have to cover because it's important. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. Of course, I will link, as usual, to the full playlist of the Silmarillion synopsis in the description below, so you can check out all the videos in this series. If you would like to subscribe to the video, you can do that here, and you can support me over at Patreon here. You can follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore, and you can find 2 of my previous videos up here. Until next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.